City of Stevens Point Board of Park Commissioners meeting, recorded December 4, 2019.
Time for what we've all been eagerly awaiting, the start of our meeting. And we'll begin, instead of a regular roll call, since we have some new members, we'll just go around and just tell us who you are, for those that don't know, starting with Sue.
Starting with me, Sue Hall.
Hi, I'm Liz McDonald.
Akira Zarazua.
Matt Kirsch.
Bob Freckman.
I'm Dan Kramer.
Sean Shabilsky.
Mike Gladowski.
Wayne Sorensen.
Jeremy Slowinski.
David Shore.
Okay.
John O'Connick is excused.
All right, item number 2, the approval of the minutes of the 2nd of October, which if you were there, you know it was a very full meeting. And there's a substantial amount of minutes there, and some of it carries over into today's business. So all those, we need a motion to approve.
I move that we approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, minutes approved. Item number 3, at our October meeting, there was considerable discussion, a presentation by Jaden Kerhoff on the problems of goose management, and a feeling that we really needed a lot more information. And so I understand we have a presentation, and it's Chip Lovell will give us the about a half an hour introduction to the subject, or the findings of the agricultural group, and then there will be some time for discussion. So.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks, Dan, for inviting me. The presentation I'm going to give you, just to give you a little background, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, if a roundup is considered in a community, they would like to have a open public meeting on a presentation about goose management in general. So this presentation is basically to fulfill that need, number one. It's also to educate you and the public that's here on goose management practices that are available for you to consider. This is not to guide you in any one direction. It's to provide you with information that's available for you to consider. So, and I'd be happy to answer questions when I'm done. There is a handout that I have. You can pass this around. I have 7 copies, but that's available on the Wisconsin DNR's website. It's pretty much everything I'm going to talk about today is in that handout. So, and that's again available on the Wisconsin DNR's website. It's about resident goose management. So, as mentioned, District Supervisor, Wildlife Biologist with USDA Wildlife Services. We have basically 2 districts in the state, one in Waupun and one in Rhinelander, and Stevens Point just so happens to be in the Waupun district. A little bit background about our agency and our mission. We do provide leadership in wildlife damage management and the protection of America's agricultural, industrial, natural resources, and we safeguard human health and safety. So that's kind of where we come in with goose management and why we deal with this. We deal with primarily wildlife damage management throughout the country and in other states overseas as well. Give you a little background about goose biology. We have really 2 distinct populations of Canada geese in Wisconsin. And there's separate approaches to managing both of them. We have a migrant population, which these birds traditionally are thought of that we see larger numbers in the spring and fall of the year. They pass through, so they're more readily, easily harassed, and they respond to harassment and other management practices much easier. And these are the birds you see, like, building up in the fall and again in the spring. And then we also have our resident Canada geese, and these are the birds you see year-round, the ones that nest here, the ones that are pretty much the reason I'm here today. So ones that are leaving behind droppings, they're attacking people when they have young, when they have nests, and they can be managed in certain ways, and sometimes management methods are effective when the populations are smaller. But when you get larger numbers, the management methods are much more difficult and not as effective. They do leave briefly in the wintertime when we get really, really cold, and if the river freezes, which happens rarely anymore, but if it freezes, they will leave. But if we have open water, those birds are pretty much here year-round. This resident bird is also very productive. They average 5 young per nest. They're long-lived, up to 20-plus years. They adapt to live alongside us, and they typically return to where they learn to fly. So if they were born here, they usually come back. There are natural predators, mostly nest predators: raccoons, skunks, coyotes, foxes. Geese are especially resident geese, are very large, 10, 12, sometimes a little larger than that pounds. They are very aggressive and will defend their nest and their young to these type of predators pretty easily. Sometimes a coyote might get an adult bird or a younger bird that's injured, but for the most part, these predators aren't as effective and they don't make a difference in the population as a whole. So natural predation by these type of predators is really not very effective in maintaining the populations. So there's different management strategies to think of. Hunting seasons, obviously. There is an early goose season from September 1st to the 15th that targets resident birds. Usually we don't get the migrants showing up until about the end of September, middle to end of September. So this early season targets those resident birds, and the harvest is very liberal. You can take up to 5 birds. Usually again, we don't have the migrant birds here, so the whole idea is behind that early goose season is to target those resident birds. And then there's also the traditional goose season that runs from September into December. It's a long season, low bag limits. It primarily is targeting all birds, and so the reason the bag limits are low is because, if you can believe it or not, that there are some Canada goose populations, and there's multiple different subspecies of Canada geese. And the ones that are typically Canadian geese that come from Canada, those birds, some of those populations are actually suffering. So we have lower bag limits this time of the year so that it doesn't impact those populations as a whole. They're very adaptable. You can see here they're nesting and raising young on rooftops. These are rooftops in Milwaukee where they put a nest and they hatched out young. And they seek water with mowed grass, which we have everywhere. So along the river here and the parks that are nearby, that you have that mowed, manicured grass. That's what they love. As you know, the damage concerns that are out there: droppings. 70 geese will produce 70 pounds of droppings a day. So a pound per bird per day. So if you think about that, that's when you got a lot of birds, over 100 birds, that's a lot of mess to clean up. Erosion and water quality concerns along the shorelines here. You can see where they're walking up and down. They erode. That's actually all that erosion is caused from geese by feeding on the grass and then walking up and down on a regular basis. It erodes, and I believe you have those concerns here along the shorelines. And the use of geese in these parks causes these parks not to be used by people, which is the intent of the whole reason we have the park. So. And then added maintenance costs by cleanup of the droppings and whether it's on the beaches or on the grass or parks or in this case on a dock. So those are all add up. There are human health and safety concerns as well. They are aggressive when they have young. They do attack people, and if you don't stand your ground, they'll come after you. The second you turn your back, we've had people go in the hospital from birds basically hitting them in the back of the head with their wing bones. It's not so much biting people; it's their wings that are the damaging part, and they'll jump up at you and chase people and hit them. And like I said, it has injured people. There's also problems with large amount of droppings causing water quality issues. sanitary concerns with droppings all over the parks and the beaches and so forth, and young kids maybe picking that up, or people stepping in it and taking it into their homes and other locations. And then another case is they are a threat to aircraft as well. So this Flight 1549 that landed in the Hudson back in the early 2000s was caused by running into geese. So what are the methods that can be used? And I know that the city has probably tried a lot of these different methods. There's remove the attractants, number one. There's, having no feeding ordinances so that people aren't out there leaving them food. Most of the time, people are feeding them bread. Bread has no significant nutritional value to geese. It's primarily a filler, so it doesn't aid to them at all, but it does attract them. So by putting up no feeding signs, and I believe the city does do that. I don't know if there's an ordinance, but I know that you put up signs in the parks, which is important. So that's one thing. When you feed geese, you congregate them, causing unhealthy conditions, potential for disease transmission, from spreading from one bird to another and from them to humans. It disrupts their natural patterns, so the idea is let's try to have them have natural patterns, not being congregated in these areas on purpose. And then those birds that are there that also attract other birds, especially during the migrant season when we get all the migrants coming through. You might have 20 or 30 geese in the park fall, summer long, and then all of a sudden in the fall you have 150 because the migrants are attracted from those local birds that are there. So the different things that can be tried, in addition to the no feeding, is allow the grass to grow longer along the shorelines. Don't mow it. Different modifications, such as riprap, or you can see the retaining wall that doesn't allow those birds to traverse from the water to land easily. It requires some difficulty, and that difficulty sometimes alone would prevent them from going from water to land. And these birds need basically three things. All animals need three things: food, water, and shelter. Water for geese is their shelter as well. They feel safe on the water, away from people and their pets and other things. So if they can't go from one to the other easily, they typically will avoid the area. And then allowing that shoreline vegetation to grow, as I said. So having taller grass and so forth around the pond or along the shoreline sometimes will prevent the geese from going onto that more desirable area where the grass is mowed. This doesn't work all the time. We've seen geese go right through a long, tall grass and reed canary grass and cattails and stuff to get to where they really want to go. But these can be effective in some cases, and adding a fence in addition to that can be effective to the high grass. Excluding them with fencing, as I just mentioned. So having fencing in addition to the riprap along the shoreline, that can be very effective. The geese, they can fly, but for whatever reason, they don't fly over that obstacle. They would prefer to walk from water to land. You'd think that, oh, well, if they can't get there, they just fly over and hop over, but in most cases, they don't. And so having a shoreline barrier can be very effective. And even something as simple as a rope fishing line right along the shoreline can be effective as long as it's maintained and kept up. It can prevent birds from walking in and out of the properties that they're causing problems. And then overhead grids, if you've got ponds or small areas, putting a grid. This is just fishing line, monofilament line over a pond. It's temporary. It can be effective for short periods of time. You can also install more of a permanent type grid over the pond, and those do work pretty well. And what it does is it's an aerial distraction where they won't be able to access the water from above. So if they won't be able to fly and land into the water. So that can be very effective in small ponds that you might have, as long as it's not used for swimming or fishing or that sort of thing. And then this is primarily just a split rail fence, and at the bottom of that split rail fence, there's a wire. 2 wires actually that go down there that prevent birds from walking underneath. You can use those wires, you can use fishing line, you could use chicken wire or plastic mesh fencing. it still looks attractive, and the fencing isn't or eyesore. So something like that would be very effective along the shoreline to prevent the birds from going from one place to another. Other harassment and repellents, and I know these have been used, distress calls or auditory type devices to basically distract or try to scare the birds away. Scare devices, this is a motion activated sprinkler system that can actually work pretty effectively. They basically, it runs on motion and it starts spraying when an animal comes near. Taste repellents that can be placed on the grass, can be very effective. The downside is it can be costly because it does need to be reapplied after rains and after mowing. So, but it does work very well if it's used and maintained. Using trained dogs, there's lots of companies out there that their sole purpose is to use dogs to scare geese away from parks and areas. Again, the downside is they need to be out there all the time. A lot of times you'll use these things, and as soon as they leave, half an hour later the geese come in. But as long as it's kind of rotated through different times of the day, different days, then it can be somewhat effective. Pyrotechnics, which is basically noise-making devices to scare them out of the parks or out of the area. Remote control, either RC boats or now we have drones available. They are extremely effective. Geese do not like them at all. So if you've got an RC community or group in the area, send them out to the park. Let them run their planes or their boats or their drones or whatever to scare the geese away. Can be free for you guys and work pretty well to keep them out of the area. And predator decoys, they can be effective, but they do need to be moved regularly. Something that sits in one place and is static for a long period of time, the geese will figure it out and they get used to it. So it's got to be moved constantly, but it can be somewhat effective. And there's population management. It's achieved by either reducing the number of new birds or increasing the mortality to the population. One way to do this is allow hunting. Obviously, I know in the city that may not be possible, along the river maybe, but using people that can use these resources for free, that provide something for the city, kind of a dual benefit, then that can certainly help reduce populations. Obviously, it's only available from September through December, so it wouldn't help the problems in the summer, but it might reduce the local population a little bit. Reducing nesting success through oiling. There are permits available from the state for free that allows you to oil the nests and eggs, but a permit is required for that. I know one of the issues here is you're on a river system, so you might not be able to find all those nests, and those birds might come from quite a ways up or downstream to the park. So, but if you can find those nests and you know where they're nesting, then this can be extremely effective. And what it does is, by oiling the nest instead of destroying it, the birds continue to sit on the nest, and they basically get the reproductive cycle out of their system, and they don't re-nest. If you were to take the nests and eggs and destroy them, they'll just go re-nest somewhere else, and you might not find them. And so the whole process starts over again. By oiling, you're kind of tricking them into completing their nesting cycle. And then lastly, round up to remove the birds themselves. And I think that's kind of why I'm here to talk about a little bit more. So Population Management Authority is approved ultimately with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is a federal end, and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, or the state end. It's a local decision, so that's made here. Whether or not you want to manage population through roundups or nest and egg oiling, it must be in accordance with federal, state, and local requirements, which we would help you in that process. So we'll talk a little bit more about nest destruction. Again, it limits the population growth, so what you're doing is the adults will nest and they won't have young. And by not having young, it ultimately reduces the total number of birds that you have here. So if all you have are adult birds, then it's not increasing the population at all. Sometimes the nesting birds will leave the site after the nest fails, so those adult birds that nested here might not stay here when they molt, and I'll talk a little bit about molting. in just a few minutes. But, so those birds will just leave the area entirely because there's no reason for them to stay here. The reason they're here all summer long is because they have young. They can't go anywhere because the young can't go anywhere, so they have to stay here with them and teach them how to feed and grow up and stuff. So, so the reason the geese are staying here is because they have young. If they don't have young, they might leave altogether and go somewhere else where they're not causing problems for you. Again, oiling limits renesting, as I mentioned. If you don't oil, you destroy the nest, they might just renest and you'll still have the same problem. It's very quick, very cheap, and it's very effective. You know, you have to buy corn oil. You can't just use any oil. The only oil approved is corn oil, but you know, $5 a gallon will last you several years for the number of nests that you would have to do. So it's really inexpensive. You just have to have somebody that's willing to go out, find those nests, and actually oil them. And we would, you know, fill you in on what the best method and approach is to do that. Again, it requires a free permit from the DNR, and it also, you have to register on the Fish and Wildlife Service's website. So we would, again, help you with that process and what exactly to do. But you basically report your take at the end of the year on the Fish and Wildlife Service's website and also through the permit process with the DNR. There is a window of opportunity to do a roundup. As I said, Canada geese molt, and what that means is you can see here, these are flight feathers that are growing in. What geese are unique, geese and swans are unique in the waterfowl or the bird world, where they molt, they lose all of their primary flight feathers at one time, so they cannot fly. Ducks usually can still fly short distances, but they do lose their feathers a little bit differently. But geese are unique where they lose them all at one time, and they cannot fly. There's really no advantage for them to fly because they have young that they have to tend to. So the idea is they lose those feathers when the young have reached a little bit older age that they're getting to close to flying. So when those young are most vulnerable is when they're really small, and once they start growing up and looking like adult geese, they can't fly, so there's no advantage for the adults to fly. So they lose their feathers. And during this time is when we can conduct a roundup to capture them. What's unique is that not all geese lose them at the same time. There's kind of a period between 2 to 3 weeks in June and July where these geese become flightless. So they don't all go at the same time. There's kind of a progression. Some will do it earlier, and some will do it a little bit later. It just depends on how old their young are and whether they had young or not. And as I said, they can be captured during this time. So what's roundup involve? We have our staff, we humanely capture and transport the geese, and those then can be used after we capture them. They're placed in these trailers with crates alive. They're not taken, we don't kill them on site. They're taken away alive. As you can see in the crates, there's ample space for them. We don't cram them in there in large numbers. We follow strict requirements with handling and capture and transportation. And they are, if there's two options. One, they can be donated for human consumption, so they can go to local pantries. And two, they can be, if you didn't want to pantry them, then they can go to be used for animal feed. That's really a choice of the community. I'll talk a little bit about costs with that and differences. But none of the geese are thrown in the landfill. None of them are wasted. They're all used to some purpose. The DNR does not allow relocation, so we can't capture them and relocate them somewhere else because this problem is statewide. The current population of resident Canada geese is between 140 and 160,000. The management goal is around 80,000, so we're almost double what the DNR really would like to see in the state. And that's why we have problems in communities like this. So the food pantry option. There are some requirements. So for the first 2 roundups that be conducted, 10% of the adult geese captured, or a minimum of 5 birds. And this is for adult geese. So if you have 100 birds out there, you know, typically what the ratio is, usually it's 30 adults and 70 young. That's about average. So if you had 30 adults, that means 10% of that, which would be 3, would have to be tested. But we have to have a minimum of 5, so we'd actually test 5. So those birds would be tested by a lab for mercury and lead at a cost of $100 per sample. So let's say we just, for easy math, let's say we just tested 5 birds, or 5 adult birds. So it would be $500 just for contaminant testing for the birds. However, there potentially could be additional testing for PCBs. And unfortunately for the city of Stevens Point, you would have to test for PCBs in this area. PCB testing is $200 per bird, so it would be $300 per bird for mercury, lead, and PCB testing, meaning basically there's a minimum if you wanted to pantry the geese of $1,500 just for contaminant testing. I know it's large, but that's what our costs are from the state lab that we haven't tested at. So, and then, so hopefully that makes sense. If they're tested for pantry, the meat is stored until we get the results back from the state, and the DNR Wildlife Health Team consults with the Department of Health and Family Services to certify what the consumption ratios would be. And typically what it is not to exceed 1 meal per month, depending on what the levels came back. And then once we have that information, those labels are put on the meat and it's given to a pantry of your choice. If the contaminant levels exceeded levels safe for human consumption, then those geese would not be available for food distribution and it would have to be landfilled or disposed of. So it's only happened one time in the state, and it's been a long time since we've had that occur. Just a little background. We've done 102 different communities or properties from basically the last 20 years. So we've done a lot. Over 8,604 geese were donated to food pantries or provided to Native Americans in the state of Wisconsin. Over 17,000 geese were donated for animal food purposes over the year, during this 20-year period. And as I said, only one community was ever prohibited from donating geese, and that was back in the early 2000s, and it has not been retested to see if there was a problem. So, okay, if you chose to go the non-pantry method, then basically that meat would be provided to places where it's used for animal food. There's a McKenzie Center that raises wild animals for educational purposes. There are zoos, rendering plants, other options that we would consider. So birds wouldn't be sent to the landfill. That option, of course, you don't have to pay contaminant testing fees, so you save immediately $1,500 right there. But there are fees associated with the Roundup, associated with, just taking them to the different outlets that we provide. So, effectiveness of Roundups. It's immediate reduction in the problem. You're going to have 50 or 70 geese in the park one day. Roundup's conducted for the most part. I wouldn't say 100% of the birds are gone, but probably 95% of the birds are gone. In almost all cases, we do not capture 100% of the birds. So there are still birds here that the public could view. And after the molting process is over, you would have birds return. You'd have birds back in the fall and the spring again, and you likely would have birds back the next year that would nest in the area. It does, however, what Roundups do is they reduce the population, so these non-lethal methods or these other harassment methods and other things can be more effective and actually work. It does provide long-term management by removing breeding birds and allows egg laying to potentially maintain populations. There's some places where we've done a Roundup, we've been there one time and never had to go back, and there's other places we go to every single year, or almost every single year. There's some places we'll go to 1 year and maybe go back every 5 years or something like that. Every community is different, so I can't say that what would happen here 1 year, whether a Roundup would be needed to be done a second year or not. That's, again, a community decision and also based on what you're seeing the following year. So I don't have a good answer for you. I know you'd like an answer to that, but I don't have one with when it comes to that. Also, with lesser birds, local birds here, it typically attracts lesser migrant birds when they do migrate through because you don't have those decoys, those live decoys, attracting those birds. And roundups in consecutive years may be most effective to remove the non-breeding birds that may return to the nest the following year. So, you likely will have birds come back the next year, and what those numbers might be are unknown. But again, if you're implementing those management strategies with habitat management, harassment, nest and egg oiling, those type of things, then a lot of those things are more effective and can reduce the need or the likelihood of a need for a Roundup every year, year after year after year. In summary, so use a variety of different management techniques for the best results, including as I just said, habitat modification, exclusion, harassment measures, no feeding ordinances, enforcing those, hunting if possible, egg oiling, and then, removals if necessary. Consider the timing of your actions. Migrant birds may respond more readily to harassment. Once those birds have nests and are sitting on eggs and have young, there's no amount of harassment you can do to get those birds out of there. They are not leaving. They have young here, or they have a nest they're tending to, and you can harass them all day long, but it's not going to be effective. You got to really hit them before they start nesting for those harassment methods to work, or after they're done and their young can fly. If you try to harass them when they have young, the young can't fly. They're not going to go anywhere other than maybe swim a little further away. So make sure the timing of your management methods are when it needs to be. Obviously, solicit public or neighborhood involvement. People do enjoy geese, so actions to decrease their presence may be negatively perceived. I don't know what the pulse is here in the community. I'm sure there are people that are opposed to it, but maybe you can get them involved by helping clean up the areas, or help oiling, or help with harassment at no cost to the city. And be proactive, manage the geese issues before the problem is out of control. Obviously, I'm here because it's out of control. But if you have fewer geese, after a roundup, then that's when you really need to be applying all those management methods. I think you're aware of this, the Urban Wildlife Damage Abatement and Control Grant. The due date was December 1st, but there are grants available through the DNR to help manage for Canada geese. I know you've gotten some for deer in the past, but it's also available for goose management. And that's, this is the website address that you can seek for that. So this is us. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I got a business card too if you'd like to get a hold of me in the future.
What is the price of the Roundup?
So a Roundup starts at about $2,500, and for new communities, typically we charge a little bit more because of a lot of unknowns. Once we do a community, we kind of know what we're in for and what we're up against. But in a new community such as this, it would probably be a little bit more, but it would probably be under $3,000. So between $2,500 and $3,000. That does not include contaminant testing. So that's just for the Roundup. If you wanted to pantry the meat, go to food pantries, then it would be an additional minimum $1,500 to that.
Is there any community relatively close to Stevens Point where we can see this plan in operation? As a federal agency, we are not allowed to, the Privacy Act prohibits me from providing names of our cooperators. Dan, I believe, has spoken with several communities, and you certainly can reach out to them, or I can certainly contact them and have them reach out to you, which I think has already happened with Dan. But
I've spoken with Oshkosh, for example, has talked very highly of the program for what they were using it for with their management methods.
And since you mentioned the name, I'll just tell you what's happened to Oshkosh over the years. When we first started doing it, there were, the permit would allow for 200 geese to be removed. We captured 200 the first year and had to let some go because we couldn't exceed the permit. The next year, we caught less than that. Today and now, we catch typically less than 50. So there were lots and lots of geese there at one point, and that's typical of most places we go. And Oshkosh is one area, that's one community that is almost every year that we go there, just because of the setting, the lake, the river that's all there. It just is a natural attractant. But there are other communities where we've done that we don't do every year, and that's probably more the norm, where we don't go every single year.
And just so you know, next month, when we discuss the item for action potentially, I do have a list the DNR's provided us with other locations that do the same practice.
I guess I'm curious, is this a one-day intervention during that 2 to 3 week molting period? So we take our best guess and keep our fingers crossed we're going to get the most geese we can? Or what is the decision-making that goes along with picking that particular day?
Good question. So we work with, probably it would be with Dan if we were to do this, if Roundup was to be decided by the community, and we would work very closely with probably Dan or someone that you designate. And it would happen sometime in that 2 to 3 week time period from June to July. We typically do not publicize that. It's basically a one-on-one, because we do not tip off people what we're doing, because we have had opposition and people try to interfere with us doing our job. So to prevent that from happening, we basically keep it quiet when we're going to do it. But we know when those birds have molted, and we have the best opportunity to catch the most number of geese. Like I said, we don't typically catch every single goose. Some will still be able to fly in some cases when we show up. So we make one attempt and one attempt only, unless you certainly want to pay more, then we can come back again. Or if there was something that weather or something else interfered with the whole process when we came out, then we would either, it's basically the decision is made the morning of. We give you every chance to back out of it at the last second. So where we confirm it the day before, and then that morning of, we confirm it. And if you say it's a go and we show up, then whether we catch a goose or not, you're charged. But typically we've done this for 20 plus years, so we kind of know what we're doing and have it timed right.
As far as the egg oiling, how would you go about locating the birds? Is that something where you have to find a bird locator such as yourself, or is it a task force in the community or hunters, or?
Well, and there's you've got Wisconsin UW Stevens Point here, lots of wildlife students.
Right.
A wildlife damage class. There's a possibility to have students do that for you at no cost.
Right.
I'm not speaking for Scott here, but that's certainly an opportunity. There might be some folks that you might have some parks folks that can do that. They might be familiar with it. Sometimes being on a river system here, you might have to have somebody go up and down the river in a boat. The one problem with the DNR does not allow oiling on public lands. So if it's DNR property, then you could not oil those nests and eggs. So that's one thing that they don't allow. If there's private properties, just getting permission from the landowner to do that, or however it works on your end. That's typically, if we were to do it, then we would talk with the private landowner and get permission to do it. But if a lot of the locals that are familiar with the river, and they probably know where they're nesting and the general areas they are coming from.
And what month would the oiling typically take place?
Good question. So geese, we have nesting occurring as early as the middle of March. Typically that happens further south, Milwaukee, Madison area. But up here, I would say late March to the middle of April. And incubation is 28 days. So but you don't want to be oiling at that 20th and after day. You want to typically oil in the first 2 weeks, so the first 14 days of nesting. So usually in early April to the middle of April is when you'd be out looking for them.
So you could be on skis.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be. And certain years, like when we had the snowfall in late April 2 years ago, that totally threw geese off, and we had a low reproduction year that year. So you might not have seen as many geese that year, but it really hindered them, and we did a lot less roundups that year because of that.
Thank you.
But, yeah, so you might be on skis
Thanks.
or snowmobile.
So with the oiling, you had said something about you can train, so like, this would be some lucky city staff person oiling
If
the
you-
eggs?
If you so decide, it could be. I mean, it's very simple and very easy. We could certainly talk about it over the phone and provide the information that you need.
I just wonder how they would do that safely, 'cause if,
Unlikely, it'd be city staff.
okay.
So, yeah,
Then in that case,
would-
then I guess I'd want to know what the cost is for that being
I
provided.
would have to, that would be something that I'd have to talk more with Dan about, and, it just depends. How we work is, we reimburse for our costs. We're not as being a federal agency, we don't get federal funds to do this sort of thing. That's why we have to charge for roundups. But our costs are basically a reimbursement. We're not, it's not a profit. It's a it's a not-for-profit, basically, situation. So it would depend on how much time and effort it would require on our end, and that would basically, I would need to know, okay, do we need to get a boat out to get to these areas, or can we easily drive to them? So those things would be factored in there. We do, just to give you an idea, there's some communities we do for $700 or $800, and there's other communities we do for $1,500. It just depends on how big of a area and what's required. So if that gives you, kind of a ballpark figure. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any idea what the cost of processing the meat would be?
Yes, it's $10 a bird.
$10 a bird?
And so, yeah, and glad you brought that up. So there, in addition to the fees for contaminant testing, there are also processing fees. But those processing fees only apply to adult birds. Only the adult birds are processed. The juvenile birds go to the animal facilities, because there just is not enough meat on those birds to be cost effective for processing. So-
And they take them at no cost to the city, I'm assuming?
Say that again?
Like the places.
Oh,
that
the
would use them
pantries.
for- yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And
But I mean the places that would use them for animal feed.
yes, well, there's a minimal fee
Okay.
on our end because of transportation
Oh,
and
sure,
stuff.
okay.
But it's minimal. We're talking pennies on the dollar or something like that. So it's not a lot. So if we use them, if they're sent to a rendering plant, that we do have costs to the rendering plant to pick them up. So those fees will be passed on. If we have to transport them to a zoo or animal facility, then, those transportation costs are factored in. But it's compared to food processing and contaminant testing, it's very minimal.
Have any of the cities worked with, just gotten volunteers to go out and do some of the nest oiling?
I know they have, yes. Yes, there might be a local birding group or university or, a citizens group that might be willing to help. There are some, again, sometimes, when you propose a roundup, there is opposition. And sometimes that opposition will come to the table and say, we'll stand up and we'll clean up the mess in the beaches. If you won't do a roundup, we'll clean up the mess in the parks. We'll do the oiling for you. So those are options certainly that are out there. Yes, sir.
Do they tend to nest in groups? I mean, when you're going out to oil, can you get like a lot in, a small area, or are they just sporadic?
They're very territorial with nesting, so they would be more sporadic. Yeah, geese are very territorial, and that's why when you approach a goose that's sitting in a nest, they are very aggressive. They will attack you if you don't stand your ground, and that's one thing that, if we would show you or teach you what you need to do. Umbrellas come in real handy to prevent them from coming after you, but once a goose knows that you're not gonna run away or you're standing your ground, typically they just hiss and honk at you more than attack you. But it's something that it's more of a, they know when you're afraid and when they have you, so.
Have you seen the best results when it's more of an integrated approach, maybe a mixture between the 2 or 3 multiple practices?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no one silver bullet. Everybody's looking for the silver bullet. The one thing that'll solve the problem, there isn't one. An integrated approach is always the best. Even just putting out the the coyote effigies, or just doing the auditory distress things, or just harassment. Those alone, as you found out, I know that there was some studies done here, that those alone don't solve the problem. The birds just come back. So there's got to be, harassment, habitat modification, maybe oiling and roundups, those might be necessary as well. So it's an integrated approach. And doing a roundup 1 year doesn't get you out from doing things down the road. It will help those methods be more effective. You got to think the amount of time and effort you put into harassing and managing geese in the city is the results you're going to get. If you don't put a lot of time and effort into it, you're not going to get good results. The more time and effort you put into it, the better the results are going to be.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So tonight, there's no action on this item. Ultimately, the idea was to get the information, and then I can bring back something next month to talk through. Dr. Scott Hickstrom is here from UWSP that's been working with the Deer Management Committee and the city for several years, I think, to kind of go through the processes we've gone. So I see a lengthy, probably, discussion on this next month, as well as the grant was mentioned, and we have, because of the deadline, submitted a portion of that. That could be turned down if we choose not to do one method or the other, but we wanted to get ahead of that based on the timing so that we had an opportunity at it as well. So a few things have been in motion. We've had several discussions, and we want to make sure everybody was armed with the information you need to go ahead and make that action next month on which route we decide to go. Thanks, Chip. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. And feel free to follow up with you if you have any questions. I've got my card going around, so.
Okay. Item number 4, an update on that property sale involving the North Central Conservancy Trust. And I should mention, I've been a board member of North Central Conservancy Trust for many years. I don't see there's any conflict of interest. We're all on the same side, but for full disclosure. Okay.
So I just wanted to give an update on this. I think I sent an email to everyone on the property acquisition or what was happening with that property. A short summary, again, just to recap, is that the property went for sale, and it was being proposed to be 2 lots, essentially. That was on the northeast corner of Bucol Park. The city was unable to acquire it due to some restrictions, deed restrictions on the property. Through some talks and discussions, the North Central Conservancy Trust was actually interested in partnering on the property, or they were seeking to preserve that area, maintain the natural resources and things that were along that park. So the city granted a grant to that group to proceed to try and, if they desire to purchase the property. They do have an accepted offer on the property, and they are set to close here in December. I think December 15th is what it's set for. There'll be some things that will come down the road, most likely. They've talked about some informational signage they want in the properties when people visit there, that they're aware of their mission and things that the NCCT does. And they've also already reached out to groups like the Green Circle Committee to see if they could maybe have the Green Circle Trail go through it as well. So I just wanted to let the committee know that the way it's going, it looks like it'll be open to the public. The natural resource ability will be preserved. And there should be, while it's not park property, it will be maintained to be open to the public, which was the goal the whole time. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer it. There'll be more details coming to this committee in terms of the trail route and stuff within Bucol Park, because that's what we manage to set up for a potential route change for that property down the road.
That's great.
I would just like to thank Dan and the Conservancy Trust for all the work that they put into making this happen, so thanks very much.
Okay, the next item is an action item requiring a vote, and that is approval of the easement agreement and compensation for the overhead electrical line along the north edge of Plover River Park. And the legal document is included in your handout, as well as a map.
The most recent example, a similar easement was granted in Bucol Park or sold, I believe, a little over a year ago. The same formula was used for this one. There is an Exhibit A in your packet if you'd like to see on the south side of Industrial Park Road is where it goes through. And this is following that same, again, the same setup in terms of the formula that we used at that time.
All right, is there any discussion? Mike,
I'd move to approve this item.
okay, a second,
I'll second.
all right. No other discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Approval has been granted, and item number 6, and this comes back to something we discussed at our October meeting, ordinance amendment to allow for off-leash dog swimming in the Mead Park area. And I think some of the details were brought out last time. This also will require a vote.
And the summary, real quickly here, you'll see that the updates are in the packet, and we left it in blue font if you don't have a colored version. Ultimately, number 1, the food and beverage restriction was struck. Language was written that says the sand area adjacent to Wisconsin River at Mead Park is not considered a bathing beach for purposes of this subsection, because up above it talks about the bathing beaches and animals not being allowed on that. One other item, kind of a housekeeping piece of this that wasn't included, when it was lifeguarded, flotation devices were not allowed because it ultimately impedes the sight lines if you have people swimming behind them. Being there's no lifeguards at this point, flotation devices are not restricted. There's nobody that enforces that. So you'll see number 4 is struck out of that as well.
Okay, is there any discussion? Since there is none, a motion to move to accept the language here is
I move approval of the changes to the ordinance.
I second.
a second.
One more thing to add, I just wanted to mention, the mayor had to go tonight, but he did want to mention that he has been, he's received a lot of positive feedback on this, and he believes that once this would be approved, if it is approved, that there is some fundraising and some potential donors that are looking to help pay for the cost of the fence that would go in. So he said that he's heard nothing but positive remarks so far.
Okay,
I have one comment.
yes.
I have had one person reach out and spoke against it, just concerns that it's a shallow swimming area, so it's ideal for small children. But in talking with the mayor and others, that it still is a beach. I mean, people can still take their children there, and there probably won't be dogs there constantly, so hopefully it should still be safe for everyone. And I'm assuming we have the expectation that if your dogs can't be controlled off their leash, that they need to stay on a leash.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, and then one other item I think that requires a vote is, and I'm not quite sure I understand the importance of this, but ordinance amending the list of parks and park locations. And I think the ones that are added are underlined.
Correct, and this came because Emerson Park was not listed. So as we've been working with the Friends of Emerson Park Group, when I went through that to get this addition added, I had noticed there were several others that were not included, so tried to put those in.
So, once again, any discussion? Okay, and so a motion would be in order.
I'd so move.
I'll second it.
Okay, Liz? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, and last of all, the director's report.
So we didn't meet last month, so it's been a busy, the weather's changed here quite a bit since the last time we've been together, but the KB Willett Arena is opened, so if you've been over, the hockey team's been playing and their skate activities and things have been going. Before we got into hockey season, we did not receive a playoff football game this year. We've been inquiring to see why that is. There is a lot more turf facilities around the area. That definitely plays a role, but also the local teams were not in the playoffs, so that definitely plays a role too. But our dashboard advertisements have been starting to go up in the Willett Arena. If you you go over, the new boards were put in, and you'll see now some new colorful advertisements that go on. These are magnetic, or not magnetic, they stick to it essentially, so that we don't have screws and things going in those new boards, which should make them last longer, is the hope. We've been working on trying to acquire a roller derby event for the Willett Arena during the dry floor times, and we've actually booked that group. They're going to practice 3 days a week in the dry floor times, and then we're also hoping to have games. They're going to have a couple facility or weekend games that they'll have here too. So that is a new attraction now that we don't have to do floor repairs, is the hope. So that's great. We have had several other users contact us, and we've been in negotiations to try and bring those in too here to use that facility as much as we can. On the park side, you've probably read or saw on the news that an ice rink was requested downtown in the square area. We did get a grant through the Downtown Business Group to purchase the supplies for it, and we are intending to try to get that in here over the next 2 weeks or so. We do have to take some snow out of it first, which we hope to have done this week, and the way the weather's forecast is setting up, we hope to put some water in probably right after the weekend. It'll take a couple weeks to get that frozen the way we want, and then they've got some things they plan to do, maybe with the ribbon cutting or things when we get to that point. So I see the temperatures are 16, I think, next Tuesday, so we're getting to that time of the year.
Phrase.
Yeah, absolutely. We've also been working on Gerke. You'll see they've been packing the snow and putting that ice rink in, and we'll be turning over to the winter sports area too here over the next couple weeks. We are not putting an ice rink in by the Central Company and Piffner Building because of that one downtown. We transitioned some of those resources, so you'll see that that's going to be really the one down in that region. We're doing hiring for the winter sports season, so you'll see some advertisements. We're trying to get up to full staff. They actually had a staff training tonight for the seasonals that have been hired, so Scott's overdoing that probably as we speak here. The tuck pointing projects that we had at the rec center building, Iverson's entry, the archways, as well as there was a cracked stone wall in the swim building, the swim house, have been repaired down at Iverson Park. On the forestry side, it was not in your packet, but we were just told and notified ATC did award a $2,500 grant for the pollinator garden out in the Kosakowski Park area. In addition, the fall tree planting, about 125 trees have been completed. We had one member of our forestry team attend the certified playground safety instructor training, or not instructor, I should say, safety inspector training. They do our playground safety inspections. Further training, the first time we'll have somebody hopefully certified on staff. They did take the test. We find out shortly if that person passed. Beginning work on the spring planting list is what Todd and his crew is working on now, as well as starting to do trimming and things for the snow plows and clearances and things that come up this time of year. On the administrative side, we're going to lose a valuable member of our team. Betty Malik has announced her retirement. She's been with the city for over 40 years, believe it or not. Her last day is January 3rd, so we are working on having an overlap with the new person once we get that person solidified. The operational and capital budget has been approved as of November. We do have several projects for 2020, including a long-awaited new filter system for the pool, as well as some of the limp pots that we have in the pool system that's been in the budget for a number of years. There's some rubber flooring replacement at the Willett Arena that'll be included. Emerson Park's got some money for playgrounds and updates within the Emerson Park program in conjunction with the Friends of Emerson Park. There's some tuck pointing at the Gerke Community Stadium bleachers we noticed. It was a new item that wasn't planned. Basically, we've got some moisture and water getting in that's freezing and thawing, and we've got some issues going on with the block and the mortar and things between the joints. So that is a large project that we're going to be undertaking next year as well. The beach house needs a new roof at Iverson Park. We've had a few things going on with those buildings down there as they've been getting older, so that's going to be done next year. The Piffner Park irrigation project was over budget, so we added some additional borrowing to do that project in 2020. And then the Zamboni will be replaced at the Willett Arena, as well as a new lawnmower. So it'll be a busy year for projects and things going on with the Park Rec and Forestry. Lastly, we did have a park technician position approved in the operational budget. So that was a position that was unfilled in 2007. So after this position is filled, the Parks Rec and Forestry will be back up to the full staff level we had at that time. So that's also being advertised. We look to fill that in January. So lots going on. We're looking forward to the winter season here and everybody coming down to the winter sports area.
Thank you, Chair. A question about Willett exterior signage. Any update? I think there were like initial discussions with university about some kind of signage for the hockey team's use.
In terms of, you talking about like the branding signage for,
Yeah.
Yep. So they had brought over a marketing specialist they had that participated with some of the things in the Gerke Stadium. They were going to be giving us some information and updates on what they were looking at. We have not received
Some
that yet.
proposals to come.
Correct, yep.
To be looked at.
Yep.
Thanks.
That's all I have.
Okay.
I just want to say, I compliment you on your work at Willett at getting stuff going there. I think that facility's been sorely underused for a long time, and I'd like to see year-round use of it, so.
Thank you. Yeah, Kate and Greg and Todd over there have really worked hard to try and acquire some of these new groups, and they were excited about the project. Obviously, it was expensive, but they were able to get it done at this point, and now we'll try to bring some more revenue in with the facility as well. So thank you.
The turkey skate was really well attended. Great. So.
Well, it wouldn't hurt to have a motion to adjourn at this point.
So moved.
Okay, second. All those in favor signify by getting up and leaving.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.